Welcome back, everyone. We've talked about drugs a fair amount on the podcast. We've talked about drugs like cannabis, psychedelics. We haven't talked about the drug that arguably most people take globally. Arguably most people have some sort of dependence on. And that drug, of course, is caffeine. So today we're going to be talking all about caffeine. And we're not just going to be talking about it from a theoretical perspective, but we're going to talk about our lived experience with caffeine. Myself, Anya and Rebecca all have a history of caffeine use, as you know. And we all went through a period of trying our best to reduce and stop caffeine from 4 to 6 weeks. We're going to talk about what our history with caffeine is like, what it was like to try and stop, the pros, the cons, the benefits, and hopefully we'll have some useful take-home messages for you guys about the utility of caffeine, the benefits, but also the advantages of cutting down and stopping and seeing what it's like to use little or no caffeine. Anya and Rebecca, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having us. I can't lie, I'm quite excited to do this podcast so that I can start drinking coffee again.
There you go. That's take-home message number one. I'll explain a bit how this episode came about. Over the Christmas period, I impulsively decided to stop drinking caffeine, and I'll go into why later. But I decided to stop, and then maybe 4 weeks into using little or no caffeine, I was having lunch with Anya and Rebecca, and I was talking about it, and I basically coerced them into trying themselves. They seemed like vaguely interested, but I coerced them. And then we thought this would be good material for a podcast. So maybe before we talk about our individual experiences, Anya, maybe you can fill us in as our psychopharmacology expert. How does caffeine work? What's it doing for our brains?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It was, I think probably for all of us, part of the fun of this experience was getting to get nerdy and learn a bit about what caffeine was actually doing to us and why we felt so rotten when we tried to stop using it. I guess one of the key things about caffeine that everyone knows is that it, in theory, makes us feel a bit more awake. It wakes us up in the morning, and that's why people like it. And the reason that it does that is it acts on a molecule that works in our brains called adenosine. And this is well known by people who are interested in sleep as the bit of your body that builds up over the course of the day and tells your body that it's time to go to sleep, or tells your body that it's getting sleepier, and then you go to sleep and your adenosine goes back down to lower levels. What caffeine does is that it blocks the actions of adenosine. Now, it doesn't destroy adenosine, it doesn't get rid of it, but it just stops it working in the same way. And so that's where its wakefulness properties come in. Now, the caffeine also acts on other parts of your brain, other systems in your brain, probably still through its actions on this adenosine molecule, but it also acts with systems that you may have heard us talk on the podcast about, places like dopamine, which are important, again, in how you pay attention to things, how much you care about things, how things feel rewarding to you. So obviously the actions of caffeine are quite widespread, and its action on dopamine is probably one of the reasons why we tend to, as Alex mentioned, why we can get dependent on caffeine. I guess to wrap up the kind of the key bits that I took away from this, from learning a bit about caffeine. Number one, which is a bit of a tangent, but one really cool thing is that the psychopharmacologist who was responsible for some of the resurgence in psychedelic research, Roland Griffiths, who sadly passed away this year, was actually one of the key figures in caffeine research as well. So he was driving some of the conversation to say that we can develop dependence on caffeine, and that there is a withdrawal effect when we stop using caffeine. Now, why that withdrawal effect is so important is that a lot of the research into caffeine and into its wakefulness properties, and into it's saying that it improves our attention, improves our reaction times, improves how awake we feel, has some flaws in the methods. And the flaw is that's been pointed out by sort of one big group of researchers, is that a lot of the people who are being tested are actually being tested in caffeine withdrawal. So they've been asked not to have their usual cup of coffee that morning, and actually you start to feel the effects of caffeine withdrawal you're in withdrawal during your overnight caffeine fast, so to speak. So the caffeine withdrawal is important in thinking about the benefits of caffeine and in thinking about the effects of caffeine on the brain. And it is probably true that caffeine does have some impact on our wakefulness and our attention, but it is also probably true that tolerance to that builds up quite quickly. And actually what that means is that over time, probably over about 3 to 5 days, you're actually not really having any of the sort of immediate waking up effects of caffeine, but actually what you're treating every morning when you wake up is the withdrawal that you feel. There's debate on this, as in all of science. It's not definite, but actually one of the, for me, probably most convincing studies that was done was by my current supervisor in the lab where I work. And they did kind of a fun study just to test out some of how we do science just in public. And it was a real world study done in a museum, just people, random members of the public coming in to learn about science at the museum. A group of them everyone got given a voucher to have a coffee, but some of them got coffee with caffeine and some of them got a decaf coffee. And in about 500 people, it was a pretty big study. Actually, there weren't any effects of coffee on attention tasks, social cognition tasks. So it was a decent sized study. It was it was a real world study, so no one had been asked to stop drinking coffee before. It was just come in as you are. It was placebo controlled. So some people got the real deal, got the caffeine, some people didn't. And in that kind of setting, in that kind of environment, doesn't seem like caffeine really did anything. I'm going to pause there because I think I've said a lot, but hopefully that gives us like a bit of a starting point on coffee and what it's doing to our bodies.
Absolutely. So it's working on the adenosine system, and that's going to increase our wakefulness, possibly affecting other neurotransmitters like dopamine. And that, to me, fits with my personal experience, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then there's this issue of, are people becoming dependent on it? And it would make sense in terms of the tolerance you mentioned, that if people take caffeine regularly, they're going to become tolerant, and what used to be a benefit now just becomes a necessity to maintain your baseline. And really all drugs seem to work like that. Nicotine, harder drugs like cocaine, opiates. It wouldn't be surprising necessarily that caffeine works in the same way. Rebecca, what are the fun facts about caffeine that you have for us today?
Thank you for explaining that, Anya. It really fits in with my experience, which, we'll go on to talk about in a bit. So Alex asked me to get facts, but I thought actually I might put the questions to you and see if you guys know the facts, because it was quite interesting to me that I was doing my research, finding out facts about this drink I drink far too many times a day before we did our experiment, and I actually knew nothing about it. So my first question to you, and you might know this because I've been asking people and quite a few people did know this, and maybe I'm just ignorant. But true or false, coffee beans are beans?
Anya?
Why would they not be beans if they're called coffee beans?
Alex, do you know the answer?
I have no idea, but my reaction would be, if you're even posing the question, then I suppose the answer must be that they're not beans.
Clever psychiatrist thinking.
You've got too many exams.
They're not actually beans, they're actually seeds, and they come from a plant, which is called a cherry plant. So yeah, all my life I've been thinking that they're coffee beans, but they're seeds. And what's interesting about the seeds, which I thought I have heard of this already, but I thought was interesting is, have you heard of coffee poo?
Like the animals that poo and then coffee's made from it, like the
Yeah,
ferrets?
absolutely. The exact name is I'll have to get back to you on the exact word because I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it. I don't want to pronounce it wrong. But they eat the seeds with the fruit and they poop them out. And apparently the process of digestion causes a fermentation process, which creates a really delicious, smooth coffee. So yeah, you can get coffee poo. And although it is very expensive, so I don't know if I'll ever have to try it, but I thought that was quite interesting.
I think I remember seeing that on the Discovery Channel when I was a kid.
Yeah, the animals, they're quite cute little fluffy things. It originated in Indonesia.
I remember seeing it in Vietnam, and I have a vague feeling we might have a box of it because I think it was cheaper to buy there, or maybe it was fake and therefore affordable. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how expensive it is, but it's apparently a lot more expensive than your average coffee. Although, to be fair, coffee is very expensive, at least in the UK these days, in my opinion. But anyway, that's conversation for another day. So where in the world, which country do you think is the biggest consumer of coffee per person? Not over in total, but per person.
I would go for the United States.
Yeah, or yeah, I'll go with US.
Yeah, I thought the US too. So the US are the biggest consumers of coffee overall, but actually over the past few years, it's tended to be the biggest coffee consumers per person is the Scandinavian countries. So last year it was Finland. I think in 2022 or 2020, it was the Netherlands. But the US don't feature in the top consumption per person, and nor do the UK. At least the UK went in the top 15 last year, which I was quite surprised about. So my last fact. Oh, I've got two more facts. I'll stop asking you questions and interrogating you guys. So this probably doesn't come as a big surprise, but Brazil was the largest producer of coffee beans last year. So they produced 35% of the worldwide total. And just to think about how much coffee we consume as a world, in 2015, although it was quite a long time ago, there were 9.92 million tons of green coffee, and green coffee is unroasted coffee. It sounds quite a lot to me. My understanding of tons isn't great, but that sounds like a lot of coffee produced. And lastly, I thought this was quite sweet, but this might not actually be true because I looked into it a bit more. I wanted to find out where coffee originated from in terms of who first discovered it. And there are quite a few legends out there where coffee came from. But my favorite one was that in the 1500s, an Ethiopian goat farmer noticed that his goats were eating these fruits, now that we know that they're fruits and seeds, and they weren't able to sleep and they were acting funnily. And he spoke to the local monks who started to make their own coffee from these seeds. And apparently the rest is history. But I have to say there is no strong evidence for that story, nor is there for any other story of where coffee originated from. But that was my favorite one. It did come up quite a lot, so maybe it might be true. But yeah, don't quote me. That's not scientific evidence.
Excellent. So now that we know all about coffee, I want to talk about my experience with caffeine and quitting, and then we'll hear Anya and Rebecca's story. I impulsively decided to quit caffeine in Christmas, around the Christmas period. And the reason was because I noticed myself feeling just generally tense. You know, it's Christmas time, there's a lot to deal with. I was actually working largely over Christmas, and for a long time I suspected my caffeine use was a bit high, and normally I would have 2 to 3 coffees a day, not necessarily an enormous amount, but sometimes there'd be store-bought coffees, you know, from a cafe, and those would have like 2 shots of espresso. And I guess for a long time I rationalized it and I thought it was fine and it was probably causing more benefits than cons. I did notice if I ever had, say, 4 or 5 coffees, which I did sometimes, that my sleep would be disrupted. But I kind of thought of it as a relatively benign, manageable habit. And then over Christmas, stuff was a bit stressful, so I thought I should do everything I can to reduce my stress. Caffeine is something, I've quit a lot of things in my life. I've never quit caffeine, so I wanted to see what that would be like. And so what I did was, first I went down from like 2 or 3 coffees a day to 1 coffee a day for a couple of days. Then I went down to 1 cup of tea for a couple of weeks, and then I went down to 0. I suspect of the 3 of us, my withdrawal experience was probably the mildest. What I felt was, for about 3 to 4 days, my brain felt subjectively a bit softer. I felt like my ability to concentrate wasn't quite as good. But I was still working over that period and doing cognitively demanding tasks. And if I took my time, I felt like I could do it. And then around day 3, day 4, I did get some headaches. And those lasted maybe an additional 3 or 4 days. And then, funnily enough, I noticed even when I went from tea to 0 caffeine, again, there was like a little bit of a drop in my energy levels, a little bit of a drop in my ability to concentrate. But then I adapted to that in 2 or 3 days. I would say for me, the main benefits have been, definitely my baseline level of tension and anxiety is lower. It wasn't super high before, but it's, I'd say 10-20% lower. What I noticed, if I drank 2 cups of coffee in the morning around 1 or 2 p.m., I'd feel like an afterburn of anxiety in my stomach, in my abdomen, and that kind of went away. Sleep is better. Sleep more feels like, I used to sleep okay before, but now it feels like when it's time to go to bed, it's like lights out, solid block of darkness, and then all of a sudden I'm awake again, which is nice. And I feel like per hour of sleep, it's more restful for me. And then the coolest thing I noticed is that my ability to concentrate is higher and more even and flexible. So whereas before, if I needed a certain optimum level of caffeine to do my hardest work, which would maybe be around 10 or 11 a.m., now I feel like I can get up in the morning and pretty much as soon as I'm awake, if I need to, I can concentrate on something. If it's late at night, 6, 7 p.m., I can concentrate on something. And I don't have that strung out feeling that I used to have in the afternoons and evenings as much. So that was my experience. And most of this happened before you guys even got involved. And then it was me telling you about it that made you make the unwise decision to try it yourself. So that was my experience. Anya, what was it like for you?
In lots of ways, very similar, which is not surprising because, as Roland Griffith's team argue, the withdrawal effects are shared by many people and well described, and hence why they pushed for there to be a withdrawal syndrome to be recognized. I guess the reason why I didn't just tell you to leave me alone is because I was curious about reducing my caffeine intake anyway. I think I would drink maybe 2 cups in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. And again, for me it's coffee. I don't really drink anything like tea. I do eat a reasonable amount of chocolate, which is the secret caffeine container that I'm actually not certain that I've cut out. Well, I definitely haven't cut out over the last month, but I feel like that's less, it's low levels. And I didn't entirely realize that even milk chocolate has caffeine until today. Anyway, so, and then I think, we had a bit of a lead in because we decided we'd start it in February. And so I think over about a week, I dropped to just having 1 cup of coffee in the morning, and then I went down to 0. But for me, the headaches were the roughest bit, and that went on for about a week. Interestingly, they can go on for 21 days. So it's not necessarily a quick thing. Although I guess headaches are so common, it can be, again, a tricky area to research thoroughly. I think the thing that was interesting, probably about 2 weeks in, I felt really good. And I think I remember messaging you guys being like really, really into this no coffee thing. That didn't last very long and probably just reflected, I don't know, life otherwise, or maybe the absence of the headaches. But I think the impact on sleeps for me as well been huge, and really similar. I would struggle to fall asleep. It would usually take me at least half an hour to fall asleep. I'd usually wake up at least once a night. I usually felt rested in the morning, but I sleep way more. I feel like I'm sleeping way more solidly. And again, so the interesting thing that I learned over this week is that so whilst coffee is reasonably short, its duration of action isn't that long. The way that the big sleep expert Matthew Walker puts it is that, your sleep, the half-life of coffee, so when your body's worked through half of the coffee that you've had, or half of the caffeine that you've had, is about 5 to 6 hours. But that means that its quarter life is another 5 to 6 hours. So if you're having a cup of coffee at like 2 p.m, at midnight, you still have a quarter cup of coffee effectively in your body. So and the effect of that is an effect on your deep sleep. So you may not necessarily be aware of problems in your sleep. You may say, I can have a cup of coffee with dinner and I still fall asleep when I get into bed, and I still fall asleep just fine. But actually, your sleep quality will be worse. And whilst I don't know if that's the bit that we're now consciously aware of, it kind of makes sense in light of my experience. So, yeah, I think that was me.
Did you have any emotional symptoms like irritability, quickness to anger, anything like that?
No, I didn't. And I'm not sure if I felt less anxious since stopping. Potentially, although I think probably only mildly so. But no irritability. I mean, it takes a lot to get me angry. So I think caffeine wasn't my Achilles heel, which is good news.
You're in the right profession.
Yeah,
Are you still caffeine free as of today?
I am.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apart from the chocolate.
Apart from chocolate, okay. So like definitely significantly reduced. Rebecca, we understand from the conversations we've had before, you had a bit of a tough time. How did it go? What happened?
Yeah, apologies for my messages through my withdrawal phase. I think it's important to say that I probably drink the most coffee out of the three of us. Not every day, but most days I would have a coffee when I wake up, a coffee on my way to work. I would make coffee at work. I'd have a coffee after lunch, and sometimes I even have coffee in the evenings. And I think, reflecting what Anya said earlier, I had I had created absolute tolerance to coffee. So I did not feel the effects of coffee at all. It was habitual. I enjoy drinking a hot drink. But I didn't notice the negative effects on my sleep having coffee that late. And in hindsight, I didn't notice the positive effects of coffee in the morning. But I like getting out of bed, having something to drink with my breakfast and the routine of it all. So I was drinking. And when I make my own coffees, they are strong if it's instant coffee. So there was a lot of caffeine going on. So I initially cut down to 1 cup of tea. And that in itself was so difficult, I think, because of the drastic change. And so initially I got the brain fog and the headaches and just felt really rubbish in the first few days, in the evenings particularly, because I think sometimes I was okay kind of going on autopilot. But I think day 5, and this is something that is not an immediate withdrawal effect, but doing some research, it does come up. I had the worst pains in my legs, which I can only describe as growing pains growing up as a child. And I looked into it, and caffeine can constrict your blood vessels. So in withdrawal, you're more likely to have dilated blood vessels, which I can only imagine was the reason. I've never experienced pain like this. And I don't know, maybe Anya, you can tell us a bit more about this, because I didn't look into it too much. But it was extremely painful. And I have to admit, I did have, I can't remember. To be fair, my memory is a bit hazy, which may be a symptom of the withdrawal as well. But I think I did have to have a coffee on one occasion. And I'll also say that I drank a lot of decaf coffee because I didn't want to lose the routine of enjoying that cup of coffee. So I had decaf coffee at work. And I don't know how, because people say that there's still some caffeine in decaf coffee. I mean, it was the Nescafe instant coffee that I got at work. It's not gourmet, so it might have some caffeine in it. But over the past week or so, I've either been drinking half a tea in the morning, or no tea at all. And I don't feel that different now, to be fair. I guess because I've still got maybe that half cup of tea in the morning in my system. So those were the negative effects. In terms of the positive effects, I completely know what you mean about going to sleep and feeling like you are straight away lights out. I haven't felt fatigue lights out when my head hits the pillow ever before, and it's a really good feeling. I have to say, I haven't felt it every time I've gone to bed, but the times I have felt it, it is something that I haven't experienced for as long as I can remember. I haven't experienced that fatigue when my head hits the pillow and being able to go to sleep straight away. I don't feel different in the mornings, but I suppose it's fair to say I've never really had problems with my sleep. I'm really lucky. So I would always get to sleep within about 10 to 15 minutes anyway, but it is a stark difference to going to sleep straight away. And then in terms of energy levels, I feel like I'm just more steady in the day. I don't plateau. Alex, I think you mentioned that you had a dip, maybe 2 p.m. I used to really feel that. And I thought it was because I just had lunch. But now I don't get that. And I wonder if it's because of the caffeine, whether than actually just feeling fatigued after having food. So maybe I unfairly blamed that on my lunch, but actually it was the caffeine of the morning kind of coming out of my system. So yeah, I feel like it's been a mixed bag. I do really miss it. I've bought a lot of decaf now. Initially I hadn't bought, but then I bought some about 2 days ago, as well as the decaf I was having at work, and it tastes the same. And it's giving, I just had a cup of coffee now, and it's actually quite nice to be able to have a coffee in the evening and not feel guilty about it. But I have been drinking so much of it now. I think I had 2 yesterday, and I might have 2 this evening. But yeah, I'm certainly a creature of habit.
How long did it take for you to feel normal again after you went down to 1 tea a day?
About a week, I think. I think maybe max 8-9 days.
Okay.
But it wasn't 2 weeks. Yeah, it was about a week. The main real intense, awful feeling.
And Anya, I'm not sure if I caught what you said. How much coffee were you drinking before you stopped?
I was drinking, so one home coffee in the morning, sometimes 1 shop coffee, so I guess it'd be a double shot espresso mix thing, and then sometimes another afternoon shot or coffee, so I guess 5 espressos worth.
Yeah, so it was similar to me, 2 or 3. 1 or 2 of them might be from a cafe, and Rebecca, you're more on like 4 or 5. It's interesting. It's worth noting that when we looked, I was surprised that you had the leg pains, but when we looked it up, it is one of the symptoms of caffeine withdrawal. And also there was abdominal pain, and nausea and vomiting are also possibly symptoms of caffeine withdrawal. I
would say, without being too disgusting, my stomach slowed down in the most polite way of saying. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I didn't have pains, but my body slowed down, which, I wasn't surprised about. And I noticed that within 24 hours.
So, I mean, we all had reasonably similar experiences. It sounds like yours was the worst, but actually 8 or 9 days through and you were done. We all had benefits. Do you guys feel overall it's worth doing a caffeine detox? Anya, you can start.
I think yes, definitely. If you feel like you're not sure, or you know that coffee's causing you some problems, I think, be that with sleep or anxiety, or even that if you've got that afternoon crash and you're struggling to do much with it, I think it's worth having a think about trying to come off. I think the other thing that I've been aware with doing it is that quite a few of my friends at the moment are pregnant, and cutting out caffeine is one of the recommendations that exists for pregnancy. And I just always remember thinking, oh my gosh, if I'm ever pregnant, that will be horrendous. And actually, it's been reassuring to see that it is manageable. If you need to do it, it's not the worst thing in the world. So I guess if anyone's worried about how it would be if they had to not drink coffee, again, it's worth giving it a go. Equally, obviously we've talked about some of the problems with coffee and caffeine. We've not really touched on some of the benefits that exists, and it's all about balancing those things up for yourself. But I think if you're curious, and if you think that there's things that caffeine giving you problems with, it's worth a go.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because there is emerging evidence, although there's also evidence that argues with this. I don't know if you guys know more about it, that coffee does have a lot of benefits, health benefits to individuals. And so it is difficult on balance. I think I'm definitely going to reduce my coffee intake. I was quite shocked about specifically the pain in my legs, but also the realization that caffeine wasn't doing anything for me in terms of my alertness, and actually stopping it has made me far more stable. But I don't know whether I'll give it up forever, because I really do enjoy it, and there is emerging evidence of long-term health benefits. And so I think it's all about weighing the risks and benefits as an individual. And I think people should definitely consider giving it a go and seeing how they feel, because everyone will feel differently. Everyone's level of attention in general is different. So people might find it more helpful to not drink it, and some other people might find it helpful. And yeah, I'm honestly not sure. I definitely think I'm going to drink less because it was quite scary, but I'm not sure about whether I'd completely cut it out.
And one thing I didn't ask you, Rebecca, was were there any emotional benefits to quitting, such as decrease in anxiety, improved relaxation, anything like that?
Yeah, it's really difficult to say, because when I first gave it up, I had some things going on which were going to make me more anxious than normal. And so through the withdrawal phase, my baseline of anxiety was really heightened compared to it has been really kind of ever. So that must have affected it. But last week we released a podcast with Andy, and after we hosted the podcast, Andy did some teaching with us about how to improve our podcast style, and part of that teaching was kind of a mindfulness-based exercise. And I'm sure you guys can comment on how I was like after the exercise, but I've always really struggled with mindfulness. I really struggle with maintaining focus and attention during the exercises, and I just can't. I've never been able to engage. And I've tried in person as well as self-directed mindfulness as well, and both times I've struggled. But last week, when I had no caffeine in my system, I didn't find it difficult at all. I was able to engage really quite well. I didn't have many thoughts coming into my mind at all, compared to other times where it'd be constant thoughts coming into my mind during an exercise. And afterwards, I describe it as a kind of trance I felt. And Andy is obviously amazing, and it's probably somewhat to do with how wonderful he is and how amazing he is. But also, I think I said to you, because when we first had this discussion to give up coffee, I think you asked me, Alex, when was the last time I felt relaxed? And I said I genuinely couldn't remember. And then last week, I think that was the first time I've ever actually felt completely relaxed. So yeah, it's definitely had a positive impact on my relaxation, and that is definitely something to bear in mind. And I suppose I'm being naughty and wondering whether I could maintain that relaxation by only drinking 1 coffee a day compared to 5. So maybe I think over the next few months I'll play around with it and see where I'm at in terms of, but not going back up to 6 or 7.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this is very, very important. I am learning a lot about ADHD at the moment. I'm working more with patients with ADHD, and what's very common in ADHD lore is that if you don't have ADHD and you take a stimulant, be that something mild like coffee or something more severe like an amphetamine or cocaine, stimulants will make you more ADHD-like, in the sense that you will be more distractible, your focus will be a bit more all over the place, it will be harder to follow through on tasks. Whereas if you do have ADHD and you take a stimulant, it actually calms your brain down and helps you to focus. So that's how we think about the difference between the effects of stimulants on people with or without ADHD. And it's really interesting in your case, Rebecca, because you said you're able to focus more on the present, i.e. you're able to practice meditation when your brain was less dependent on caffeine. And that doesn't surprise me, because I noticed the same thing myself, in that when I take caffeine, one of the positive benefits actually is that I become more optimistic, which is a very strange feature. It's not like just wakefulness or happiness, it's optimism. I become more optimistic about the future. This makes sense because if caffeine increases the release of dopamine is a very future, or is part of the future oriented reward system. Serotonin is more associated with present-based rewards, like food that we're eating right now, or meditation that we're experiencing right now, or warmth that we're experiencing right now. Whereas dopamine is more about what goal am I going to get in the future? Am I going to get that promotion? And am I going to be able to accomplish this particular goal? So that's the positive aspect of it. And then for me, it would bleed into what's the negative aspect of future orientation? Anxiety. So it would go from optimism to fear. And that's kind of the pattern that I see playing out. So having discussed all that, I'll tell you guys something I haven't told you yet, which is in the past week, what I've experimented with is having a weak cup of coffee every other day, to see what that is like and to see what kind of effect that has. And what I've noticed so far is that I seem to get the benefits, basically 80-90% of the benefits, with very little downside. Firstly, it is shocking the effects coffee will have on you if you haven't had it for 6 weeks like I did. You don't realize it's a drug until you A, experience the withdrawal, and then B, you drink it having your baseline being normal, and it very much feels like you've taken a medication or a drug. And like I said, it feels, because I took a low dose, but it feels like largely positive, and then I didn't seem to feel any anxiety. It didn't cause any effect on my sleep or anything like that. But it's shocking that such a small amount caused such a big effect. I really felt it quite strongly. And it's shocking to think that I used to drink probably 4 or 5 times as much per day as I'm drinking now every other day, and basically getting all of the benefits from and minimizing the side effects. So, that being the case, Anya, what are you planning to do from this day? Do you have are you going to feel it out, or do you have a regimen that you're going to plan out with your caffeine?
I think I might continue not really drinking it and having my decafs in the morning and whenever I fancy a drink. Because similar to Bex, I enjoy the routine, I enjoy the ritual, I enjoy the break that going to get a coffee gets. I enjoy the, going to a coffee shop and having a chat with the barista and, all of that. But I think I will maybe once a week, maybe a couple times a week, treat myself to a proper, really nice coffee, because I haven't found a decaf that tastes as good, and it kind of gives you like the smell and just all the feelings, obviously, but just even the sensory feelings that a real coffee gives you. So, but I think the thing that I will definitely try to stick to is having it, no later than say 10 a.m. and really trying to keep the afternoon clear of caffeine so that I keep the sleep bits. I think that's what I'll try. I mean, ask me next month and I will probably have caved and be...
After you've fallen off the wagon.
Oh, yeah. But I think I will... The bit that I think is good enough that I will stick to it is not having afternoon coffee, because I think sleeping better is well worth it. Yeah.
Rebecca, what's your plan?
Yeah, I think you've enticed me to not completely stop after telling me that, Alex. I'm not going to lie. I think I would like to reduce my intake, but I would like to have a coffee every now and then and actually enjoy the effects that I stopped having, because I love coffee. I love the smell. I love the taste, and I love the habit. I might stick to my routine of tea in the morning, even though, I think maybe I'll try decaf. I don't know, but I agree with you. I guess that there's some reason within me that doesn't want to not stop drinking coffee, and I can't put my finger on exactly what that is. And I can tell you lots of positives that I've had after obviously the withdrawal, and yet something within me just doesn't want to stop drinking it. And it probably is related to the dopamine and everything. But yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
We'll see.
Maybe a take-home message, or a couple of take-home messages I'd want to leave you guys with. Firstly, if there is anything that in your life you do every day that's not strictly speaking necessary, it's always worth spending some time abstaining from it, just to see what effect it has on you, how dependent you are on it. It's really good to have a brain that's dependent on as little things as possible, because it just makes you more flexible. You can handle harder, tougher situations. What I felt through the process of quitting caffeine is that I was removing a vulnerability. Like, my brain was vulnerable before because it needed this external drug essentially to function well. And having decoupled that necessity has been really helpful. And then the last thing that I might mention is one really useful thing to know about drugs, and caffeine is a drug, is that drugs don't add anything to your brain. Drugs unlock things from your brain. Drugs cause the release of chemicals, we call them neurotransmitters, that already exist in your brain. And so when we drink something and it makes us feel really good, we feel like the thing is giving us the good feeling. But actually it's more of an unlocking effect. And so what that means is, when you're taking any drug, you're kind of making a deal with the devil. I'm going to get a short-term release now, and I'm going to pay for it to some degree later. Now, if you only do it a little bit occasionally, then the debt is kind of easily repayable. But if you're constantly making that withdrawal of dopamine, this is something I discussed on our podcast with Anya, you're going to end up in a massive deficit, which you're going to have to pay for. So I think that's worth keeping in mind with drugs in general and caffeine, in contrast to things like good nutrition, for instance. So when you eat really good food and you exclude food that's bad for you, you actually are taking in things which are the building blocks of your brain, the building blocks of neurotransmitters. So if a person wants to feel better mentally and physically in a more sustainable way, you don't have to make the deal with the devil. You can actually improve your diet, say, and obviously exercise is another thing you can do to actually improve your physiology, rather than simply getting that short-term unlocking. So those are a couple of points I want to mention. Is there anything else you guys want to say before we conclude?
suppose if any of our listeners think that we should try anything else and they want to know what it's like for us, then I'm happy to do that. I would encourage you guys, if you'd be keen, to try the 30 plant a week challenge that I did. If you wanted to, I've definitely seen the benefits of that. At least I've had blood tests to show that it's benefited me. But yeah, if there are any other things that our listeners think that we should try out, we can say no. Obviously, I'm not just going to.
We will do anything. Email us at thinkingmindpodcast@gmail.com. Anya, do you have any take-home messages?
Oh, maybe. No, I think the key thing for me was being mindful of what time you're having your caffeine, and that there might be impacts on your sleep that you're just not consciously aware of. And actually, that may be something that is useful to switch for a decaf, even if you want to just keep going with enjoying your coffee or enjoying your teas the rest of the time. That's probably my take home.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for joining me in my impulsive lifestyle decisions and for discussing it with me today. And thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks so much for listening this week. If you've got any feedback, as always, do get in touch. If you enjoyed the episode, why not give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because it really helps other people to find us. If you want to get in touch, you can find us on Instagram or Twitter, or you can drop us an email. And if you value the show more generally, why not buy us a coffee? Thanks so much.